The Drum Candy podcast is brought to you by Drum Factory Direct.
What's up, everyone? Welcome into episode 7 of season 2 of the Drum Candy podcast. This is your host, Mike Dawson, coming to you from Drum Factory Direct in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I usually save this for the end of the episode, but if you don't mind and if you enjoy the show, drop over to iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, and give us a 5-star rating and drop a nice review if you don't mind. That helps spread the word and get this show to a wider audience. All right, this week's guest, one of my personal favorite drummers, the great Joey Waronker. If you're not familiar with Joey, he's, to my mind, a definitive post-grunge indie rock drummer. His early, most notable work is with Beck, and he's continued with Beck throughout his entire career. He spent a handful of years with REM. He's been involved with Thom Yorke of Radiohead's projects, Atoms for Peace, and also Thom's solo work. He's got his own projects, Ultraista, and most recently a duo with Mauro Rafosco called Jamoro. I highly recommend checking out both of the Ultraista records and the new Jamoro record if you want to get a true glimpse of what Joey's all about. And then in the past handful of years and continuing on, Joey's been touring with the great Roger Waters of Pink Floyd. As you'll hear, Joey's a very thoughtful, creative mind. He really, especially with his gear choices, which is what the show is all about, we dig into why he picks the drums he picks and what his current obsessions are, how he recreates the classic Pink Floyd sound. So there's a lot to dig into. So let's get right to it. The great Joey Waronker. So I was thinking about the last time we talked. You were just finishing up a tour with Atoms for Peace, and I believe the first Ultraista record had just come out, and you were just about to go on tour with them, and then you had a kid, right?
Yeah. Well.
It's been a minute.
Yeah. He's about to be 9.
Crazy.
Yeah, totally crazy. So yeah, I know that was quite an eventful little period in my life. That's for sure.
And then, so last year, another Ultraista record came out. So what happened in 8 years there for there to be such a big gap?
Oh, I know. We're I don't know. I mean, we're just so busy with a million things, and then but it's so cool that we were still interested, and then there was a minute of there must have been a period where Nigel found some stuff that we had done and just developed it, and then he was like, check this out. Here's the next Ultraista record. It's like, oh yeah. Wow, that's right. Cause we had done a bunch of sort of basic ideas. So.
Oh, okay. So those were produced years ago then?
Yeah. Kind of like when we were doing shows and stuff after the first record came out. So
okay,
but yeah.
Yeah. So since then, what has happened? Yeah. You did a run with Beck, a bunch of shows with Roger Waters. What else has been going on? It's like you haven't slowed down one bit.
Yeah. I mean, the touring with Roger Waters is pretty full on, actually. That took up. Well, let's see. I did a record with him in 2015, and then the touring stuff went pretty much up until 2019. Yeah. And then we were going to go out again in 2020. So, so it kind of takes me all the way up to, it filled up those years.
Okay.
I didn't have much time to do much else. And then I was kind of taking advantage of the time in between tours and just, being like family dude.
Mm-hmm. So. Is there any plans on going back out with him, or is it all changing now?
Yeah, we're actually going to go out next summer.
Nice.
Yeah. So it got delayed for, I guess that's a 2-year pushback, which is, but it's good. And actually in January of 2020, we had moved house to kind of like to Pasadena, which is kind of like, we were living in Silver Lake's kind of more like suburban where we are, but it's really cool. And it was like kind of pandemic perfect. But then also like, more kid friendly, but I also gained there was a separate structure where we lived. That was, the previous owners, he was a painter. It was just like painting studio. Cool. So it's kind of like, I have this kind of big, awesome space, which I'm in right now.
Oh, nice.
So yeah. So then since all of that business in 2020, I've been like, just almost like every day doing different things in this room. So.
Is it, how do you handle that if you're kind of committed to be touring? I guess the past 2 years you could do as much producing and songwriting and session work as you wanted to, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There was really nothing else going on. It's only, for me anyway, it's only the last maybe couple of months where I've been like, interacting with people in person. And, but yeah, so like, it seemed like there was just a lot of people who were getting in touch with me to put drums on their stuff and remotely. Cause it was hard I did some in-person sessions during that time, but it was hard, sometimes it was just too difficult or, depended where people were and all that. It's hard to travel. So yeah, there's a lot of remote recording and writing projects, producing stuff. The Joe Moreau record. So yeah, it's kind of been. So that's actually been it's the last 2 years have been like unexpectedly full on in a different kind of way than what I'd been used to for the last 10 or something.
Is the kit for Roger going to change? And what is it? Is it a concert tom kit?
That's a good question. I'm glad you asked. But I'm not sure yet. I'm going to wait. I don't have the set list yet. So I will tailor my kit to match what I think will be right for the set list. So, but I mean, I couldn't imagine it growing. I could imagine it, like maybe, because right now I had my concept for that kit was that I would cover kind of like the sound of Dark Side of the Moon and then the sound of The Wall. And that would be able to cover kind of the span of, that time of Pink Floyd. So I built up one kind of just like classic rock kit, like, and tuned, like kind of jazzy as it were. Well, but like the way that Nick Mason's drums sounded on that like earlier, Dark Side of the Moon era. And then around that, I had some Dead concert toms, which were more of like the Wall sound. But I mean, also just because I like that sound, but, representing that kind of like heavier, thuddier rock tom sound. So that it was fun. So I would have like, and then we did a thing with my drum tech where we switched snares, which I had started doing with Beck, at Beck's request. He was like, well, can't you just switch snares? It's like what? And then I thought about it. I was like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. As long as, I have a drum tech and he's into it. And he was super into it. And so for the Roger show, I said, let's keep doing the snare swap and we'll just do, low, medium, high. And that should cover everything. And he was like, when we started getting into it, I really prepared like even before rehearsals, I was like conceptualizing the kit and working with the set list and talking to my drum tech and talking about the snares. And he was like, no, dude, you gotta get more. You gotta like, wait, we need a fourth one. Like, let's get a little more specific.
Nice.
He was like, I'm not afraid to do it for every song. And I was like, I mean, okay, but I don't think that makes sense. But we ended up with 6.
No kidding. For how many songs?
Yeah. It was a pretty big set. God, I should know that number. That's ridiculous. But, it was like a 2.5 hour show. Yeah. Some of the songs are very long. Mm-hmm. So, but like, it was great. I mean, yeah. So we showed up with 6. He was like, let's go with 6 snares. We know what the main 3 are going to be, but this way, like, there's a more leeway. And it was cool. 'Cause like there were, some of the things that we did on the new record that had like a super high snare. So like I was able to cover that and I hadn't thought of it. So, and it was just for that song, but it was cool. It really, really made a difference. Yeah. And then I can't remember, there was another one on the new album that was the opposite, where it was like ridiculously low.
So what are the drums, specific drums?
Oh yeah. So, and then I'm using CNC drums. So the Cardwells lovingly make me these amazing drums that are so beautiful. And, and it's cool. They're like, they have so many ideas, and they're so nerdy, and they know that I know I'm such a kind of a geek about, vintage drums as they are. So they're like, in their minds, they're like, well, we can do shells that are like Camco, or we can do edges like Camco, or we could do Ludwig, or we can do Gretsch, or so it's, and then they're like, we can do a spin on that, or we can do Sonar, which is a little more challenging, but so like I was like, let's do the main kit. It was always like a Ludwig, but let's, sort of like you guys do your thing, like Ludwig Camco vibes for like the sort of 60s-ish rock, jazzy, high tuned part of it. And then for the concert toms, like make them more like 70s Gretsch. And then the snares, at first I was like, I just want 6, like 6.5 Ludwig, just regular, like Ludwig, what 500, what do you call it? Superphonics. And they all have to be, if you're switching, they all have to be the same depth. That's the key. Like we came up with a whole system. So as long as they're the same depth, it's really easy to, swap them. And then I was like, and even better if they're the same snare, then it's, something that's very versatile that can be tuned differently. But we ended up with, like, I think let's see, maybe there's two Superphonics and a bunch of CNC, and then my drum tech, Tim Soya, he's very tight and super into Joe Montanari. So he was like, dude, you got to get Joe to make you one. Like, so I did that, and that was like, a 6.5 that sounds basically like a field drum, and he was able to, kind of make something that was specifically that. So.
That's super fun.
Super fun. Yeah. Super nerdy.
Do you have to play them differently? Like when the super dead guy comes up, you have to play differently, or is it just a song that makes you play differently?
I think, yeah, a little of both. I think you're right, though. I think they all have different feels. Yeah, because I'll be going from like the super high one which is, you know, just like cranked, and it was some kind of like a brass shell that the Cardwells made me, a CNC. And same thing. I was like, oh man, I need a 6.5 that can sound, you know, just like cranked and be, you know, and they were like, yeah, I mean, I know everything can do that, but that in particular was very responsive. But then the Montanari one is like, you know, a thicker head, like an aquarium. I'm using aquarium heads, and this like weird thick head that they make that lowers the pitch and tuned not like ridiculously low, but low. So yeah, it's totally different, which I mean, I love it, but I do that like on the one with the super high tuned snare, like I play incredibly soft, and which is what the song is. And then the low one, actually, I think I'm laying into it. So yeah, it's wild.
Do you change sticks for each drum too? I know you have 2 separate models.
No, I found I was like, I just stick to I had to stick to the same thing. But you know what I was doing? We also came up with a system where like I found sometimes I wanted to use the butt end of the stick for the snare. So like I would, you know, I knew which songs that was for. And so I would just like, I was switching between like, you know, the front end for the snare and the butt end when I needed to like lay in and just be a little more like get a thicker sound or something, at least in my head. That's
yeah. How does it translate?
Yeah. I've done that so many times in recording sessions where I'm like, okay, wait a minute, but how does this sound? And I'm like using, you know, the front end of a tiny stick and then the butt end of a bigger stick. And, you know, esteemed, amazing producers and engineers are like, not a ton of difference.
But for you, it is. It's all that matters.
Yeah, I think so. It's like a feeling thing sometimes.
So how do you get the Pink Floyd bass drum sound? With dampening and tuning, what is your approach for that?
Well, I initially I've always struggled with bass drums for live. So initially, I mean, it was set up the whole time where I had a 22 and then I had a 24 with a remote pedal, like off to the side. So I was like, cool, I'll just switch. And I was trying, you know, we were trying to decide. And I was actually like, well, maybe for the more old school stuff, we should actually, maybe the 24 would be better for that. And so we experimented with that, like, cause we could just make that super pillowy, cause that was more of the sound. But then I just found that at the end of the day for live, just one good sounding bass drum was the way to go. And we've messed with it. I mean, I found the most effective way to change bass drum sounds is, I hate to say it, but like triggering something. So like with Beck, we were doing that a little bit where I was always wanting to, I mean, I guess I did in the old touring days, I would have a cat pedal. I didn't mind that. They're so weird, but I didn't mind it. And I would just have that like down on the floor. And then sometimes I would just switch to the, like triggering an electric sound. But I found like, cause I always used to do like a remote bass drum and I could never like dial in getting the you know, like a super different character. I have a feeling if you did like a big sound, which would probably just be, you know, typical sounding, and then like maybe like a tiny like jazz sound, that would work. Like almost like I mean, I've used an 18 cranked up forever, and it shocks me. It's like in the room, it's not, it never ends up being that different. You know, it would have to just be like, okay, this is for a soft song or something. But, so yeah, but triggering samples, unfortunately, or I guess it's not unfortunate, but that seems to be the way to go.
What is your current studio kit there?
Oh, here?
Yep.
I over the last kind of couple of years, well, I'm obsessed with fiberglass drums. I've collected so many pearl fiberglass drums for years now, and I mean, and I guess they're still kind of, sometimes they're cheap, but I would just like do a thing where I would look around and be like, oh, there's one for $50, or, you know, that started when like my friend Scott from Istanbul Cymbals, he saw a giant white concert tom kit in Craigslist, and I was doing like a warm-up show with Beck at the Echoplex, and he was like, dude, if you play it, I'll buy it. And I looked at the listing, it was like $150. I was like, dude, you're on, except I'll buy it. Like, it was like an hour drive away. I was like, if you'll go with me to get it, like, I'll play it, and you don't have to buy it. It's only $150. And I mean, just like in the last month, I think like 2 people have called me and been like, you know, I'm looking for this specific sound that you do. Can you bring that kit? And it's that kit. Yeah. Yeah, it was a joke, like a joke.
Yeah.
And we were like, oh my God, this is for better or worse, this is my thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
The toms just sound amazing. And that was like with Beck, he just thought it was funny as well. He's like, oh yeah, rock, like hilarious. That's so ugly and insane. And then after we were doing the stuff, he was immediately like, let's go. We have to record with that drum set, like immediately. And that was the song Chemtrails. It was like, just do that stupid shit you've been doing. So yeah, sorry, I digress, but my latest obsession was with fibes.
Okay. Yeah. Great stuff.
Yeah. I love fibes. And so I found kind of like a unicorn fibes kit, which was a bebop, like 18-inch kick, 12 and 14-inch, 12-inch rack, 14-inch floor tom. And it was like, wow, this is definitely amazing. They're cool. They look crazy. And then I was looking for more, and somebody called me and said, there's like basically like 2 kits, or maybe like a gigantic double bass drum kit that looks like it's never been played. And it's for sale at Pro Drum Shop for like $1,400. And I was like, what? How can that be? And I went and checked it out, and I was like, oh no, I can't. It's too many drums, first of all. And I was like, why is it? I was like, I know those guys forever. I'm like, they know what they're doing. I'm like, so why is it so cheap? Because it looked to me like maybe someone got it, maybe with like an endorser back in the 70s, and maybe played it a little bit, and then it kind of didn't get, like, it had the original heads.
Wow.
Which unfortunately they'd kind of like started to disintegrate, like Remo plastic heads. They were like cracking around the edges, and it was weird. I'd never seen that. But maybe something to do with the something in the fiberglass.
Yeah, probably.
But so yeah, so they were like, oh, well, it doesn't have any hardware.
Mm.
And the deep collectors, I think Steve Maxwell is super into fibes, but he was like, so yeah, the deep collectors won't buy this kit because of that. And so I was like obsessing, and then I had coffee with a drummer friend who was like, I need to buy cool old drums. And I was like, you want to go in on this crazy fibes kit? It'll be $700 each. We both get these, like, basically like a full set of drums. So yeah, so now I have 12, 13, 14 rack, 16, 18 floor, 22 kick, and the snare drum is my favorite. Which
is fiberglass?
It's the fiberglass, like regular fibes snare is my new favorite. It's I mean, it's weird. It's like, it's kind of a little bit, it's so weird. It's like snappy. And I know, like, Buddy Rich, like, you can see in so many pictures of Buddy Rich for years that's in the photo. He only used those for a long time. And so it's very responsive and snappy, but like, I feel like no matter how high I crank it, it's still low. So it's like, and a little bit boxy at the same time. So it's got like this kind of low end thing that's happening, but it's responsive. Cause I've tried other fiberglass drums through the years and snares, and I was like, they're just weird. They're just ringy and like, they're meant to be toms.
Wow. Let's talk about snare drums then. That's your current favorite. What would be your, I don't know, 3 or so most used snares?
I mean, in the studio, I'm definitely, like, for a long time, I got into that, like, kind of what I was saying before, and live, the Ludwig Superphonic. Like, I always feel like if all else failed, if I was at a recording session and had 2 just regular Ludwig Superphonics, 1 5 and 1 6.5, that would cover any scenario, any sound that I would need to achieve. Yeah, that said, I have a lot of like, like 20s Ludwigs, I guess, with those rolled, like the Black Beauty style, like with the rolled shell. And
Were they called universals?
oh, I don't know. Are they?
I think they might have been called universals.
Oh, that's cool. That's really, yeah. I need to. I'll look at this next time I'm with one. But I don't have any of those at my house. What do I mean? Oh yeah, and then I fell in love with the pearls when I got into the toms. The pearl, I guess they call them Jupiters. So they're like chrome over brass, and also like a 5 and a 6.5 is really, really cool. Yeah, the 6.5 Jupiter I have is for just like a fat, low sound. I don't have anything else that's that like perfect. And yeah, what do I have here? So I have like, so in my studio here, it's crazy. I have like this live room that we're in, and there's like, so that's kind of like a basic kit I've set up where I can swap things around. So that's more like the snare changes quite a bit. And then I have like a solid ply, I guess it's a Ludwig. So like from the 20s with a super sensitive snare. I love, and yeah, that's my newest thing too. I'm like, wow, I love the super sensitive snare thing, which I was always like, whoa, they just don't work for, pop music are getting a low sound, but I've figured it out.
Okay. What's the secret?
I don't know. Well, it's just a tighter sound. And I realized it was like always like stopping the snares, like sometimes with tape, even like a thin piece of tape at the edge of the snares. And I mean, sometimes I may still do that on a super sensitive, but generally I'm like, if I just mess with it, I'm going to get that like more naturally. So, and then it's like, I guess it's just like getting the right sort of tension on the bottom that matches what they are. I don't know what the mojo is for that, but
I wanted to ask you about your snare sound. When I think of your snare sound, it's like dense and like tight. It's a tight sound and it's dense. Like as a general, all-purpose snare sound coming from Joey Waronker. That's what I think of. And what would be would that be the Jupiter? What drum would you go for that?
I know. Well, I'm crazy. So then like, yeah, the Jupiter does that, but like, I'm definitely having a reaction because there's been so many years of like the sound of like a low, thick snare drum. So I've been kind of like, trying to push against that for a long time. But it still ends up. So it's, for example, like I have a Max Roach Gretsch that I love. So that's like a piccolo, from, I guess the one I have is from they're all from like the 60s. And I don't know what they do, but that's like, you can get kind of like that fat thing, but it's just in a higher pitch. So like I've been using that drum and getting the same, like that sound you described. And I'm like, that's weird. That shouldn't be. And, I'm trying to like, I want to make it higher. And, but yeah, like, and then I think the one that I have that does it the best in my studio, I have it's a weird one actually. It's a chrome over brass Ludwig, like Superphonic, but it's from the 70s. It's like they didn't really make them. So I think they would make a few on special order. And it has a crack in the shell, which is why I bought it, because I'm cheap. I was like, whoa, this is a chrome over brass Ludwig, and it's only like $200. What's going on? And it's like, there's a crack. And I'm like hitting, and like, it seems really good though. I'm like, they're like, yeah, it's really good. And so that one's cool. I have it like cranked up, but with like probably like a shitload of dampening, and then the snares are probably like taped. And that's on a crazy drum set as well. That's on a Ludwig standard nesting kit. Have you ever seen those?
I have never seen those.
Oh man, I was so excited when I saw one. It's, I don't know what year they were making them, but definitely it's probably 60s, 70s. And so they're like, it's 6. Anyway, it's like a tiny tom that's, I think 6 or 8, 8, 12, 13, 16, and they're all super shallow. Like, I guess that's kind of been a modern thing. But they had, those Ludwig standard always had these kind of weird wraps, which now have like seemed cooler, way cooler than they did then, I'm sure. But they did the wrap on the inside as well.
Weird.
Yeah. And then so the idea is you can just stack them. So it's for your gig.
So and the weird.
The 3 there's like, it's kind of fun to look up, like Ludwig standard nesting kit, and they sound insane. They're just, the toms are so like incredibly full sounding. And the kick too, they just sound great. And with that snare, so that's been my, like, you know, probably like, that's more like the sound I usually, that, I don't know, I've done, like recording with Beck and I guess other people, well, and with when Nigel's recording me, like, so that's largely his doing as well. Yeah, I guess at the end of the day, back to snares, like I'm always like, I mean, I show up at a recording session with, you know, like way too many, but I still have this ethos of like, you know, I could just, if a Ludwig 5-6 Ludwig, and then anything else would be, you know, because that's what we specifically want. Like if somebody said, I'm, you know, I always ask, I'm like, are you going for anything, or do you know, or do you want what kind of, are there some sound options you're thinking? And usually people are like, I don't know. Don't bother me with that. But that's why. And then you get there and they're like, yeah, we want it to sound like, you know, like they don't, but you don't know. I mean, we know as drummers, I guess, but when you're a lot of times, producers and artists are like, I want it to sound like this record. And you're like, oh, that's going to take, you can't just set up like any old kit and get that. That's like, that's going to take some work. And if we're willing to do it, I certainly know how to get there, but like it's a bit more, sometimes that's more challenging. And so I have like tons of old, like 60s Japanese stuff is pretty effective as well for like a lot of things that I do and are asked for, like, oh, this sort of trashy, garagey sound, like, you know, that's, I can still do that with a Ludwig 500, but it's a little harder. Like you got to get it to sound sort of thin and nasty. And whereas, you know, like, or like a James Brown kind of like thing, like sometimes I'm like, oh, wow, I have a, like, you know, like I think Pearl usually made them like rebranded, like probably steel or some metal shell drum from the 60s, super cheap, and crank it up with the original heads or old heads, and it has that sound. And with a piccolo or something that you would assume would be the thing that would do that, it's like way harder to get authentic. So
interesting. So as a producer, engineer, and drummer, are you thinking about what you're going to do to the sound as well after the fact, or do you try to get it on the way in, you know, 80-90% where it's going to end up?
Oh yeah. As a producer, like, well, this last couple of years has been so interesting because I've been recording myself so much. And I've learned so much. And so like I was balancing, like if I'm recording myself, it makes a lot more sense to, like, you know, not affect the sound going in too much unless I really know what I'm going for, in which case, you know, that makes more sense. But I'm finding I'm striking the balance now. It's like, I guess it's like anything. It's like experience, like experiencing happy mistakes with, you know, oh, I put a microphone, accidentally patched it through a compressor that I didn't mean to, that was, everything was turned all the way up and it does a thing. And now I know that trick. So I know I can quickly get that. But I have also, recording myself, found, you know, how to do it afterwards. And that's, it's all like in the box. But there were certain things that never really cared that much about before, because my attitude was like, well, if I'm recording myself at home, like it's never going to be like being in a studio. So like, why not just, keep it kind of quirky and raw? But I do have a lot of gear. So now I'm sort of like, okay, I know the tricks. I know it sounds good. So I'm going to EQ the kick and snare now on the way in, because it's a little bit better, I mean, it's not like, and then it's going to get probably, it's almost definitely going to get more of it later, but at least that's like, I don't know, that's working. And then maybe an overhead has an EQ on it and some compression. Like early on, I was like, lay off the compression. And then after months of doing this, I was learning how to like, knowing when to use it a little more intensely, and knowing when to use it a little more sparingly, and how to do that in a better way, depending on, the application. And, and it goes, I'm like, wow, it goes for things for me, my own productions, and things for, if someone wants me to do a drumming session.
All right, so let's shift that into Jamoro. Is that how you say it? Sorry. Jamoro.
I don't even know. We kind of made it so you could Joe Moreau, because it's
Joe Moreau. Okay.
It's Joey and Morrow.
Okay.
And and then we're our friends and people around us were like, when we were trying to figure out, band names are always tricky, but we're finding it particularly tricky being of our age in the era of like information, where every band name is already taken. Or you have to be careful. You come up with a clever band name and then, no one's going to be able to, when they Google it, they're going to end up, at a chicken farm or something like that. So
Joe Moreau. Okay.
Joe Moreau is what we settled on.
All right. So this is all going to relate to that, producing yourself. But how did that project come about? And I'm very curious about how you guys are writing this material. I find it fascinating to listen to the record, and it's all these little sounds coming in and out. Like, I don't know, where did these things start? Like, what was the first kernel of an idea for a Joe Moreau track?
Oh, cool. Well, Morrow and I were playing together in Atoms for Peace. He's a brilliant Brazilian percussionist. And then he and I, the thing that we had sort of developed in Atoms for Peace, like playing together and the sounds we were using. One of Thom Yorke's friends, who owns a fashion line, asked us to do that by ourselves for like a fashion show. And we were like, whoa, that sounds interesting and fun. And so that started the collaboration. And then from that, we met up and, we both came up with some ideas that we could, so we wouldn't just be like jamming. Cause we did that too. And it was sort of like, cool. Now we have 3 hours of jam sessions, and let's see what happens. If it's a little structured, maybe it'll be easier to, get motivated to turn them into music. And, so yeah, he wrote some stuff at home and had some Pro Tool sessions, and I did the same. And then we met up and we played, and then we went through this thing where we were trading files, like as people do. But the process for us was mostly, like he went through a round of kind of like, creating like more musical, they were like super rhythmic, of course. So then he went through a round of like bringing out melodies or like song idea, more like harmonic and melodic stuff, and then sent it to me. And then I like kind of almost like, kind of like remixed it, but like just took it and like made forms and made like manipulated sounds. So it try with the thought that maybe everything could like start sounding like they belong together in a collection of music. And then we kept going back and forth from there.
So it was a lot of layering and then editing each other. Was that the process?
Basically, yeah, it was that kind of a process. I mean, and not too much. I think it was maybe like there was maybe like a total of like 2 trades. And then and then I would like play it for people and they would say, "This is really cool." And I would say, "I know, I think it is too, but I don't know what to do with it." And they would say, "Yeah, I don't know." but then out of nowhere, I have a producer manager, and I guess I'd given it. I wasn't even sure. I was like, did I give that to you? Like, but he I guess was playing it for people, and then Sony Masterworks got involved. So that became like having a record label, like an A&R guy who was like, okay, this is really cool, but I have this grander vision. That was what I think that's what we needed to really like hone it in. And you know, and they really wanted collaborations, which to me made sense for this. I was like that. I'd sort of been thinking the same, because it was, even though we worked hard to try and make it sound like it was from the same, everything was similar. It was definitely like it's definitely all over the place, which I love. But so that was cool because of their involvement. It meant, you know, I felt like it gave me the confidence to call, like, you know, my friends to add, like, write vocal stuff on top of it and so on and so forth. Very
cool. So the ones that started with you, what were your ideas? Were they drum parts? Were they harmonic things? What did it start as?
Oh yeah, like everything for me, it's basically like drum. I realize I've always been this way, where I just hear like drum parts and layers and like, for better or worse, you know, it's frustrating sometimes. but like, I love like bands like Can and Noi, or like the krautrock bands. And because it's like, sometimes it's just a groove that, you know, keeps going and going, but it's like, it's so infectious. So I've always been drawn to that and how to create that. But I tend to pile on layers and I have figured out a way to, you know, make a sort of puzzle or a Jenga thing that sonically holds together. So like, that would be my thing. Like, I would just have an idea of a drum beat, and, you know, or I think I had one where I was like, I have this idea of how to make the drums like maybe trigger a drone.
Interesting.
So I was like, oh, I'll experiment. That's that song No Air. I was like, oh, I'll experiment with that and see how it works. And, you know, and so that was basically the track.
And there's one where you're playing like a shaker in your left hand or right hand, instead of a snare, you're like hitting a shaker on the drum or something. I just saw that. Which track is that? Is that the one with Sharon Van Eaton?
Yeah, that's called Nest. And so that was, and that was actually an example of one that was pretty much like mostly almost like a composition that Morrow did. And it was not rhythmic. Like, you know, he was like, let's have some stuff in there that's not just like a full on, you know, oh, two drummers collaborating. And then whatever we did with it, I just thought, it was like, she would dig it, I thought. And so I sent it to her. I asked her, and she was down, and I sent it to her. And then after she contributed, like the track got a little bit bigger. It was like, she said she gave it like somewhere to go with her, like with her parts. So it was cool.
So what, I mean, it's probably impossible to ask, but what would make you play that shaker on the snare versus overdubbing a different sound after the fact? Just an interesting choice. Like, you're playing the backbeat by hitting the snare drum with a shaker, I believe is what you're doing, or hitting the rim.
Well, I mean, to be, so when I record, cause like we were doing those videos, and it was the fun thing about those videos was, it's like, how could we do this live? Basically, like if we were going to go and play, and like, what if it was just the two of us somehow? How would we pull that off? And, you know, we'd have to use tracks, but so I had to like go back to the sessions and then think about it in those terms.
Oh, okay.
So I was sort of reinterpreting it there.
Got it. Okay.
So like everything that was done on that track was like totally layered, like, okay. And I think I just thought, oh, this sounds like a backbeat. Like if we were doing a show, I could do this shaker, and my friend had just given them to me. He makes these awesome shakers. My neighbor, that guy, Griffin, who's in, Dawes.
Okay. Yeah.
And he sells these shakers that he came with an idea where like you like take some kind, whatever can that is, like it's a small, like for a small paint can kind of thing, and attach the bottom of a drum key. So it's like a shaker drum key in one. So it means that you can put it on the tension rod of your snare drum or a drum. So I mean, I assume meant for people playing gigs.
Right. So you can grab it quickly.
You can grab it quickly. I found that to be totally ineffective for me because of like, first of all, I had trouble getting it on the tension rod, and then I had trouble getting it off. Like get caught, you know, I was like, wow. But I suppose, you know, if you plan it properly, but he made all these different types of shakers with that configuration. And I think one had this very, like, I was like, oh, that sounds like that could work for this as a backbeat for the.
Okay. That makes sense. How do you deal with, like, if you're on a session, like a Thom Yorke session or something where it's heavily like programmed or produced, and then you're coming in to add things on it, does that affect gear choice and how you approach performing? I mean, the
Yes.
Thom Yorke record in particular, it's like, what did Joey do on that? I can't even tell what's real and what's not. I know he's on some of this, but I don't even know what it is.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, well, for sure. When we're doing stuff, I mean, there's definitely a discussion. So like, sometimes it's like, well, it would be cool if it was just like a jazz drum kit. Like, let's see what happens. But my go-to is definitely like, how do I interpret, like, how can I reinvent the wheel on this and like show up with, so like, you know, I've developed a whole kit around that, where it was like, what will sound like, almost like live drums, but a drum machine, if I'm just playing for a live show. And then this is going to be really cool, because if it works out, then it'll be a palette for recording. And so that's certainly, and then that ends up being like tiny snare drums and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. I'm just so deep down the rabbit hole on that stuff. So yeah, I have a whole kit that's set up. That's like a tiny, like a children's 16-inch bass drum and tiny snares and teeny tiny hi-hats from Istanbul and noisemakers. I mean, it's not like, you know, a lot of people do stuff like that, but I'm definitely drawn to the idea of like, how do you make a drum set that doesn't sound stock, you know, like, and then if you're going to be stock, like, that's great and that's fun, but like in this, so many of the collaborations I've done over the years, there's the mentality of like everyone's trying to do something new. So.
And is the electronic stuff your responsibility, or is it already on the tune, or is it? I mean, where does that stuff come into play?
Well, yeah, and with Thom, like he's super deep into like, I think that's part of his writing process, and also part of he enjoys doing that, and is, you know, has a whole thing. So I was like, I don't need to go there at all. It's better for me to just like, you know, be acoustic drum guy, and you know, what's going to work with the samples. I mean, even like for Ultra Ista, which is like kind of somewhat of a similar idea, but it was more like, let's just we can use a small regular drum set and intermingle that with programming. But the last time we were doing stuff, I was like, let's use the bass drum on the tracks. It gives it this quality where it's like, you know, we're trying to make it electronic hybrid, and it just gives it it's like we're committing to using tracks anyway. So like the sound is amazing, and it's so solid, and that way that obsession over like different bass drum sounds is completely achieved, because each song already has its own bass drum.
Wait, so you were triggering them, or they were on playback and then you played off of it?
I was like, they're just on playback and I want to play off of them. And cool. I mean, and I've tried all kinds of things. Like we were doing stuff where we were like doing that music, which is pretty experimental and electronic. And we were like, we committed to not using tracks. And it was a funny thing. It was a lot of work, and it really, well, it was super cool because we were doing it, but like you would have to be a nerd and be like excited, because at a show you just hear the music, and like if you look at the stage, we're all, that it's mostly me. Like it looked like I was just sitting back there like knitting or something, because I was triggering pads and trying to keep triggering loops, and like I was so focused on like all these multitasks, and you know, Nigel's like playing bass and keyboards and looping a thing and doing a vocal thing, and and Laura the same, like, and so to us, it was like, whoa, that's pretty magical. But then I also had the sense of like, well, wait a minute, now I get why. Like, I remember, I think I was asking someone well, I won't say who, cause that's rude, but, in a band like that I really liked. And I was like, oh man, how do you do it? Like we did this whole thing where, we don't play with tracks. And he was like, oh, wow, well, good for you. That's really cool. But he was almost like, that's what you're a good musician. You think that's what you have to do. And then you try it and you learn that it's not as important as you think it is. And then I'm like, oh, cool. If we play with the tracks, that means I can actually like play.
Yeah. Perform. Yeah.
Yeah. I can perform. And it's not just like, wow, the drummer's good enough to do all this stuff. And it doesn't sound like he's stiff, but what if the drummer could actually go for it? And then, so yeah, I was like, whoa, I'm going all the way. Like, if I'm not even playing the bass drum, like suddenly it sounds like it holds up as dance music. Mm-hmm. I can still play the bass drum too, but I'm not holding down the fort that way. So like, I don't know when I do stuff like that again in the future, I'm excited to like push the limits on what you can do creatively with tracks like that.
Mm-hmm. That's exciting. So, man, we're at the end of the road here.
Great. Perfect timing.
Yeah. So what is on the docket for 2022? You mentioned heading back out with Roger, hopefully.
Hopefully as planned, nothing changes. We'll go out next summer. And, right now I'm really loving like recording all the time like this, like I have been for the last, 2 years during this crazy time. And I feel like it's I don't know, there's something that I'm going to be doing with that on the horizon. But I am a creature of like, I'm like a chameleon. I'm constantly like collaborating with other people, with new people. And, but I could see the older collaborations continuing, even though years go by. I could see that happening. But I could also see just like, making music, being more studio bound and do it. But I think, there's exciting stuff going on with that.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to hang out today. And, hopefully I'll get to see you on a gig in person next year.
Yes, someday.
Okay, that's it for this week's episode. Hope you enjoyed that chat with Joey. And if you do enjoy the show, please drop a review over on iTunes or Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. That absolutely does help get this show into more ears. And go listen to Ultraista and Jamoro. And there's a live Roger Waters record that's out with Joey playing classic Pink Floyd tracks and some Roger Waters solo material. Dig into his discography, very creative, and I'm going to go layer on some percussion and drums right now. So see you next week.